This is MacVoices TV. Welcome to MacVoices TV. This is the talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Joining us again, it seems like it's becoming a regular thing now, is Joe Kissell. But this time, he is the author of Take Control of Troubleshooting Your Mac, 2nd edition. Joe, welcome back twice in a row.
Yes. In fact, I've been with you even more often than your viewers realize. Only this time, I'm in 3D. Oh, wait a minute.
I don't think it works that way, Joe.
Okay.
Maybe we were all in 3D.
You have to keep trying, you know.
Yeah. The last time you were here, we talked about your brand new Take Control of Speeding Up Your Mac, which you described as the 3rd in a trilogy.
Right.
So we're sort of doing the 2nd in the trilogy out of order, or at least the revision to the 2nd in the trilogy out of order. But this time we're going to talk about troubleshooting. And the first time we started trying to talk about this, when the recording didn't take, I think my question to you was, what has really changed with troubleshooting? I mean, after you learn how to troubleshoot Snow Leopard, aren't we pretty much done? Don't we know all of it?
Well, I'm going to give you a different answer today than I gave you in our unsuccessful recording, which is, technology keeps getting more complicated. And the number of things that can go wrong today is greater than the number of things that could go wrong a year ago. I mean, one of the things that that provoked me to do this new edition was I got this new Mac 6 months ago, and I tricked it out with 16 gigabytes of RAM. It was really fast, really nice. I was really enjoying it. And one day I was just minding my own business, doing nothing special at all. The computer just completely shut down. It didn't get any warnings, nothing popped up on the screen, no kernel panic. It just stopped, shut down completely. So I'm like, well, that's odd. And I turned it back on and everything seemed to be fine for a while. And then this kept happening. Sometimes it would happen 3 times in 10 minutes. Sometimes it would happen once every few days. And I thought to myself, well, there's something I don't talk about in my troubleshooting book. And I've had sort of a series of experiences like that where I personally have problems that my book didn't explain how to fix, and so then I had to figure out how, what's causing this problem, how to solve it, and then explain that in the book. I certainly haven't explained all the problems that a Mac can have because the list is endless. But basically, as new models come out and software evolves and hardware evolves, there are more things that can go wrong, and things that I had never thought of before. And in addition, I pulled in some stuff from some of my other books. I pulled in some troubleshooting books from my mail and spam book, my backups book, and just other places where I talk about certain troubleshooting things. And I pulled some of those into this, and I updated it so that it talks about Snow Leopard as well as much as I know or am allowed to say about Lion so far. And I tried to just give some more techniques, some more basic things that you can try when troubleshooting, some more prepackaged solutions, and some more sort of diagnostic principles. So there's, like I say, I could have made this book 1,000 pages long or even longer if I wanted to catalog every single thing that would go wrong, but I figure, it's been a couple of years since the last update. I know now about things I didn't know about a couple of years ago, so I wanted to at least expand it as much as I could and get some more good information in there about how to solve more problems.
Joe, one thing about troubleshooting, every troubleshooting book I see, including yours, it's not a concern, I guess it's just a question. There always seems to be something different about my problem than the ones you describe or the ones that you try to describe or target. I think it's interesting that you try to, pull in from spam, from mail, from all those different sources. How do you decide what topics are worthy? And you said something about prepackaged solutions, sort of along the same lines. How do you decide what problems to provide prepackaged solutions for?
Yeah, well, the first thing I do is I give you a sort of a little toolkit, some basic procedures that everybody needs to know how to do that can solve a lot of problems and that will come up later in a lot of specific situations. So everybody has to know the different ways to restart your Mac. Everybody needs to know how to disable preference files and how to run a disk repair utility and those sorts of things. The prepackaged solutions, I was looking for things that were very common, things that I find a lot of people complaining about on Apple's discussion forums, on Macintosh, on MacFix, on all the different websites, things that are very common, and things that there are well-defined solutions for. I mean, there are problems that are pretty common, but it's so difficult or so finicky to pin down an exact solution that I can't really say anything terribly helpful about it. In some cases, the real answer to the question is take your Mac to an Apple store and let a Mac genius look at it, or take it to a repair shop or call a consultant. And I mean, there are some problems that, even though they may be common, that's really all I can tell you to do, because the solution just involves so many steps or so many variables or so much indeterminacy that I can't just tell you. So I'm looking for things that are both common and easy for me to explain. If you follow these steps, there's a really a good chance that you'll be able to fix the problem. And I do also, in addition to those two things, try to give you some steps that you can go through to sort of think like I think, or think like a repair person would think. All right, we're like a doctor or a mechanic. You come in with an ailing person or an ailing car or an ailing computer. What is the professional going to do to try to figure out what is wrong? And this skill of diagnosing problems is a really useful skill for anyone to have, even if you don't have tons of computer knowledge or tons of medical or mechanical knowledge. The basic principles of how you go about isolating what's wrong from what's not wrong, and performing tests to figure out where the problem lies, it's a really valuable skill. And so I try to give you a little bit of a sense of how I think about problems, so that you can, if not zero in on exactly the right solution, at least you can get in the ballpark, and you'll have some really useful information if you need to end up doing web searches, or if you need to call a repair person or take it to an Apple store or whatever. They're going to ask you all these questions, and you'll have ready answers. You'll say, well, yes, I did try this, and this, and I checked this, and here's the result, and I checked this other thing, and this is what I found out. And that will really help the person who ultimately needs to fix the problem to not waste their time or your time, and get to a solution rapidly.
You gave me exactly the answer I wanted, because you're right. It takes a little while to learn to think like a troubleshooter, like a diagnostician. But it's surprising how easy it is if you just pay a little attention and sort of don't panic, but think logically. Why is something not working? Okay, how is that connected to what? I mean, everybody, the first things you tell people, number one, restart your Mac. Number two, repair disk permissions. That solves a lot of problems. But once you go beyond that, then you have to start logically working things out a little more. So that must be one of the most important things you could teach us in this book.
Right. Now, I should jump in here and say, because I wouldn't want to miss a permission, a little Freudian slip there. Wouldn't want to miss an opportunity to preach my little sermonette about disk permissions. Repairing disk permissions is not necessarily the second thing I would recommend. Now, it isn't a bad thing to do, and I do talk about repairing permissions in the book, but I also talk about the fact that even though this procedure can solve certain real problems, it has this sort of unfair reputation as being just a cure-all, and when I see somebody say, well, you did try repairing permissions, right? And I think, well, that's like saying, before going to the doctor for any complaint at all, be sure you take some aspirin and wait 20 minutes. Well, yeah, aspirin is a really good thing to do if you have a headache. It's not a really good thing to do if you have a broken bone. I mean, so I want people to and this is something we talked about as well in the Speeding Up Your Mac book, I want for people not to be sort of taken in by the mythology of Mac repairs. It's not anything, you know, there's nothing mysterious about it. There's not like I have to, you know, do the dance and say the magical incantation and pray the right prayers and burn the incense, and then hopefully, you know, the Mac gods will smile on me and bless me with a solution. I mean, it's just not like that. You can figure this stuff out scientifically. You know, it's true. Yeah, sure. There are some things you can do that are just quick fixes that you don't have to mess with all of the experiments to get to, and they cost you nothing and they have very little risk. But I am trying to promote a way of looking at problem solving that sort of discards all of the magical thinking and just says, you know, it's a machine. It's a machine, and you can figure it out.
Joe, one thing I hear frequently offered as advice for a misbehaving application is, oh, it must be a corrupt prefs file, or a corrupt this file, or corrupt that file. You know, just delete that and everything will be okay. And that's not bad advice necessarily. The problem I find with it, though, is I don't know how to tell if a pref file is corrupt. You know, it's not like it turns red or, you know, comes with a little tag that says I'm corrupt.
Right.
How do you feel about that advice, and can you give us any direction on how to implement that advice if you think it's good advice?
Yeah, well, there was a day when corrupt preference files were a much bigger problem than they are today. It happens. But it's actually a fairly rare problem. Now, the first thing I should mention is that, again, going back to the sort of mystical thinking, files on your computer don't just decide to decompose. I mean, it's not like there's bacteria in there that eats them away when you're not looking. You know, if you don't disinfect, you know, things don't happen on their own, barring the odd, you know, quantum effects on your disk drive. I mean, things just don't randomly go wrong. If a file becomes corrupted, it has to have become corrupted for a reason. So, let's say that you're using some program. You've gone in and changed some preferences, and just at that particular moment that the program is halfway through saving that preference file, that, you know, revised preference file to disk, it crashes. Well, now the file has only been written halfway. You've got yourself a corrupted preference file. You've got a file that isn't completely whole. Now, that can happen. It does happen. And there are some other situations that can lead to a corrupted preference file. But, I mean, it takes a tiny fraction of a second to save a preference file. The odds that you will have experienced the right kind of error during that fraction of a second are really slim. So, yes, there are things that can happen that can lead to this effect, but they're pretty rare. So that's the first thing I want to say is don't jump to a conclusion, because it just doesn't happen that often. Now, there is a utility you can download called Preferential Treatment, which will scan your preference files. And as long as they conform to the sort of modern XML standard, the plist format, this utility will examine them to make sure that they are well formed, that they are proper XML. That doesn't mean there can't be errors in them, but at least it means that they have been completely written intact. Now, preferential treatment hasn't been updated in a couple of years. It still works. There are some cases where it fails, and some cases where it says, well, you know, I just don't recognize this preference file format, so there's nothing I can tell you about it. But you can at least verify that a preference file is sort of whole, and that's a good first thing to do.
Okay, I didn't know about that utility, even if it is a couple years old. When you say it fails, Jerry, do you mean it gives false positives or false negatives, or just says I don't know what it is? It basically says
I don't recognize this file format, or something along those lines. So it's not. I mean, it'll put the, you know, the information in red as though it's an error, but it's not saying this file is bad. It's saying I can't tell if this file is bad or not.
Okay, now the next one I have to read, because I was kind of surprised to see this in a modern Mac environment. reset PMU, SMU, SMC, NVRAM, and NVRAM or PRAM.
Well,
first of all, that's a lot of alphabet soup. And second, I thought the days of zapping PRAM were behind us.
Well, long story. So once upon a time, a number of years ago, zapping your PRAM was one of those things, one of those standard troubleshooting steps that everybody did with their Mac whenever it had some sort of weird problem. So there was restarting, yes. This was back before there were disk permissions to worry about, so you didn't have to do that. But you'd try restarting with extensions off, by pressing the shift key. And one of the other standard things you do is zap the PRAM. So that's restarting while holding Command Option P and R, and then you wait until you get the second, startup chime, and then you let go. So back in the old days, the PRAM was a tiny little bit of memory on your Mac's logic board that was backed up by a battery, and it would store certain information that your Mac needed to keep track of between restarts, such as the time and date, and which video device you're using, and some other sort of basic settings that your Mac needs to know about before it's even either it needs to know about before it's either loaded the operating system, or it's information that it doesn't want to have to go out and figure out from scratch again. Now, as Macs evolved over the years, the list of information that got stored in PRAM sort of diminished. Some of this information was moved to other spots, and some of it was just moved into software. But Macs also evolved other little chips on the logic board that did other sorts of things. For example, the PRAM or NVRAM is sort of one sort of thing. The PMU is the power management unit, the SMC, the system management controller. There are all these other little circuits that control things like how the power management, how your battery works, or battery charging, and those sorts of things. And other aspects of the way Mac OS X interacts with your hardware. And depending on which model of Mac you have, you might have PRAM/NVRAM, you might have an SMC, you might have a PMU, you might have some combination of these different, as you say, alphabet soup. And what they all share in common is that if something goes wrong to put an invalid value in this non-volatile memory that's on your logic board, then when your Mac tries to start up, it's going to go, something doesn't make sense here. And so you can have, your Mac might not boot up at all, or you might have kernel panics, or you might have crashes, or it might other things can go wrong with your video display, or your battery might not charge correctly, or there's a whole long list of things that can happen. And it can even affect your Mac's performance. So unfortunately, there's no single remedy. I mean, in some situations, that same Command Option PR procedure is, when you're restarting, is exactly what you need to do. But depending on which model of Mac you have, and which of these components seems to be suspect, you might have to go through one or two or even three different procedures to reset that thing. Sometimes it's as simple as you turn off the power, you pull the plug, you put the plug back in, you turn it back on. Sometimes you press and hold a button. Sometimes you do a key combination. They're not complicated things to reset, but you do need to be aware that there are things within the hardware that might have to be messed with beyond just your things that you can do in software.
Joe, I don't want to cross over into take control of maintaining your Mac, but I do have to ask. Are these things we should be doing on any kind of regular basis? I mean, even if that regular basis is once a year, Happy New Year, zap my PRAM, or reset some of these things.
Well, I get asked this sort of thing a lot, and in maintaining your Mac, I talk about all those things that you really should do periodically. ranging from backups to cleaning up the icons on your desktop to running disk repair utilities and a long list of other things. The troubleshooting book really has is only about things that you do when you are experiencing a problem. So there are, of course, lots of good things you can do to prevent problems and to maintain your Mac, but the things that I talk about for the most part in the troubleshooting book are things that just don't make any sense prophylactically. I mean, you can. When you have a certain kind of problem, you might run a disk utility to do, to repair your disk, and it's true that running a disk utility every few months, just to see if you might have gotten any errors on your disk that they haven't shown any symptoms yet. That's not a bad thing to do, sure. So there are a few areas of overlap, but in general, the sorts of things that I recommend for solving problems just don't help you. They don't do any good if you aren't already experiencing a problem. It's like, if you've broken your arm, then wearing a cast is a good thing. Wearing a cast on an arm that hasn't been broken is just annoying, and it doesn't really help, so it doesn't fix anything. So I try to avoid doing extra work that isn't really going to get you anywhere, because life is too short.
Interesting analogy, and that's a really good one too. I hadn't thought about it exactly that way.
It might protect you from breaking your arm, but I mean, you can't
get anything done.
There's got to be limits.
Joe, something you said there triggered something I see on one of my Macs. Actually, it's on a MacBook. I'm running Drive Genius, and once in a while I'll get a little warning that says, hey, you've got some errors on your disk. You really should, look into this and run the repair utility. And yet I haven't seen any problems. So should I be paying attention to this? I mean, you have to wonder when things show up that they tell you you're having a problem and you're not seeing it. Now, I don't really want to wait until the disk has crashed and burned, but at the same time, is it giving me legitimate things that I really need to pay attention to?
Well, without looking at your computer and looking at the report from Drive Genius, I can't say for sure. There could be a couple of things going on. Let's say that Drive Genius noticed that some particular file was damaged, and that happens to be a file that you never use. Well, then, kind of, so what? If it's a file you never use, then you're never going to notice the effects of that damage, and it doesn't matter. But it could also be the case that Drive Genius is noticing something a little more serious, a little more insidious. You have bad blocks, or you have directory corruption. And again, let's say the directory is sort of an informal name for a bunch of files that you can't actually see. You can't go and look at your directory. They're deep within the file system. They're used to tell Mac OS X where all the little pieces of all your files are on your disk. So it could be that something has happened to damage one of these very specially hidden files. And again, there are no effects because you're not accessing that part of the disk, or the right combination of factors to evoke the problem hasn't occurred. But I would never say to ignore the advice of a program like this that says, I've noticed errors. If you notice errors, restart your Mac, start it from another volume, run the repair, because it's easier and quicker to do that than to try to examine the logs and decide, okay, this particular error that's pointing out, now, will this ever affect me? Well, I think this part of the directory I might not use until September, so I can probably, it's not worth it. And it's too complicated, and a lot of the times you're not going to know anyway. It's not even going to necessarily give you enough information to say this is likely to cause problems or it's not. I say, if you're using TechTool Pro, Disk Warrior, Drive Genius, any of those sorts of programs, and they say there are errors, just fix them. Don't let it get any worse.
Yeah, sound advice. I think we all have that mentality of the car mechanic that says, oh, you've got this going wrong under your hood. And it's like, okay, I don't know what that is. And do I really? Because the car seems to be running just fine. But it's a little bit different with these programs. You already have them. You've paid for them. Why not use them to their full benefit?
Right. I mean, it's not it's not like a car or a body in the sense that a lot of the problems that you have aren't going to get worse on their own. I mean, if your doctor says, you have an infection, and if you don't, treat this, it's going to get worse and worse and you're going to die. A lot of the problems you have on your Mac are either there or not there, but they are not going to necessarily get worse and worse and worse on their own until something self-destructs. But some of them do. And so if you're not an expert and you can't tell the difference, but you do have a button that says, click me, I will fix the problem, then, click and fix the problem.
Joe, one that I want to pick on you a little bit just for the fun of it. I seem to remember in our last discussion about speeding up your Mac, a very kind of impassioned discussion on cache files.
Yeah.
And yet here you're saying, clear the cache files. Can you have it both ways?
Yes. So a couple of things. So cache files come up in maintaining, they come up in troubleshooting, they come up in speeding up your Mac. So what I said in the context of speeding up your Mac is that deleting cache files will not speed up your Mac. Well, 90% of the time. Cache files exist to make operations faster. So if the cache files aren't there, the operations are going to be slower. The only time that cache files are going to cause problems is if, again, sort of the same thing as with preference files, if they were corrupted or damaged some way, or if the program was poorly written and it just keeps accumulating a larger and larger and larger and larger cache. And then you start up the program, and it takes longer to read in all that cache stuff than it would take just to regenerate the stuff from scratch. I mean, these sorts of things happen. But if you have a well-behaved program with intact cache files, then deleting them will not help anything. It will not speed up your Mac. But when a problem occurs, that's different. It's like saying, I'm not going to wear the cast as a preventive measure, but when X-ray shows my arm is broken, yes, I am going to wear a cast. So there are certain types of behaviors that if you see them, that's a really good clue that, in fact, yes, there is something wrong with my caches. And if there's something wrong, well then, yes, absolutely, do delete them, but do it selectively. Don't use one of these utilities that will just plow over every single cache file on your computer. You can do that, but then you're just wasting your time, because then every single program that uses cache files has to rebuild them from scratch, and it's a waste of time. So what I tell you in the troubleshooting book is, even though deleting caches preemptively won't speed up your Mac, it does solve certain problems. You have to be selective, know which ones you're deleting and why. And then in the world of maintaining, I say, again, you want to be selective. There are certain types of caches that are notorious for causing problems, and as long as you don't do this too often, and as long as you do it carefully, it isn't a bad idea to delete just those. But those people or those programs that go through all of your system level caches, all of your user level caches, all of the font caches, all of everything else, Safari, and just wipe it all out every day, week, month, I think that's really excessive.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I don't want to walk through the whole book, because I mean there are so many topics here, so many specific things, and then the general stuff we already talked about. But I think there's one that's really important that we touch on, and it's one that many of us rely on to keep us out of trouble, and that is Time Machine. We're running Time Machine. We're running those backups so that if anything does happen to our Mac, we can step away and not lose anything. And yet Time Machine seems at times to get a little crazy, and that's the last thing I want getting crazy, because that's what I'm counting on. How do I know if I'm having Time Machine trouble? And can you give us some ideas on things to do to make sure that if it has gone bad, I can get it fixed and feel comfortable and sleep at night again?
Yeah, unfortunately, Time Machine is prone to error, and I have personally been seeing more error messages coming from Time Machine in the last year than I did previously, and in fact, new error messages that I hadn't seen before. And they're all different kinds of error messages. I mean, an error message could indicate that your time capsule, for example, if you're using a time capsule, is going bad. I mean, they are just, you know, the mechanical devices. There's a mechanical hard drive in there, and they do wear out eventually, so that's possible. But it's always very disturbing to have, you know, the suggestion that something is wrong with your backup. There is a message I have seen a couple of times that completely freaks me out, which is, your Time Machine backup is toast, and I'll be starting from scratch again next time. Okay, and then the only choice is okay. It's like, what? You telling me my only option is to click this button, which is going to delete all of my backups and start over again? Like,
you want to talk to somebody about this?
Yeah. Now, this is just another reason that you don't want to have only one backup. I mean, I use Time Machine. I also use Crash Plan. I also have bootable duplicates, and so I know that even if one of my forms of backup completely craps out, I have backups to my backups and backups to those backups. So my first piece of advice would be, do not put all your digital eggs in one basket. Don't rely completely on Time Machine. Have another form of backup, at least one as well. The second thing is, if you encounter, the time, if you haven't gotten any errors from Time Machine, that's a hopeful sign that it's probably working well. But in the tidbits world, Adam Engst has designated every Friday the 13th as International Verify Your Backups Day, and this is a marvelous idea. There are certain tasks that everyone should do periodically, just in case, like replacing the battery in your smoke detector and verifying your backups. So Friday the 13th, because it's a day that is associated in the popular mythology with misfortune, or if you prefer, every full moon or whatever, every once in a while, you should go into Time Machine or whichever program you're using to do your backups, and just try restoring a few random files. Make sure that they are there. Make sure that they are intact when they're restored. And if they aren't, then it's a lot better to find that out when you're not having problems than when your computer has died and then you realize, oh my God, my backups are non-existent, or they're messed up in some way. So having multiple backups and periodically verifying that your backups work are probably the two best things to do. I do talk about some specific Time Machine errors and what to do if you encounter them, but frankly, Time Machine is really easy to use when it's working properly. But when it isn't working properly, it's kind of opaque. It doesn't give you a lot of control. There aren't a lot of buttons, switches, checkboxes, procedures that you can do, to fix it. There are ways that you can run, for example, disk utility on a Time Machine volume, or on the disk image that your time capsule or whatever stores. It can fix some problems, and I talk about those in the book. But there are a lot of situations that Time Machine can get you into where you are going to get that message, sorry, this isn't working out for us anymore, we're just going to have to start over again. So hedge your bets. That's really the best advice. Hedge your bets and test your backups periodically.
Yeah, that's outstanding advice, because we're focusing on Time Machine, but you're right, any of the backup software, the backup drive that you're going to could go bad. There are a lot of things that could happen, and you want to be sure that you have that option. And we always somehow end up talking about backups, but it's just so important if you really value your data and your working environment to do. And in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that expensive once you have bought the right stuff and just implement it. It's more of an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And even that isn't that bad.
Right.
Joe, take us through the trilogy again, where this book fits in, and tell us about all three of them, where they can get them, and how much they cost.
Sure. So the first book was Take Control of Maintaining Your Mac, and we did a minor update to that a couple of months ago. And so that is all about preventive maintenance. This is about keeping your Mac in good working order, preventing things from going wrong, and helping to keep its performance in good shape. The second book was the one we've been discussing today, Take Control of Troubleshooting Your Mac, and that is about solving problems. So no matter how well you maintain your Mac, things can go wrong, and they're not necessarily your fault, they just happen, so that's okay. They can be software, they can be hardware, they can be user error, but Take Control of Troubleshooting Your Mac is all about solving problems. Now, the third book, the most recent book in the trilogy, is Take Control of Speeding Up Your Mac. So, and again, even if you've maintained your Mac very well, even if it's not experiencing any problems like crashes or error messages, you can find that over time your performance gets a lot slower. And so this is about finding all the ways to optimize your performance, to get rid of, bottlenecks and obstacles and clutter and things that are slowing down your Mac, to get it at least back up to the speed that it had when you first got it, and very likely far beyond that. So there is a little bit of overlap in the books, like we were talking about backups and disk repair utilities and caches and things. There are certain things that come up in different contexts, but for the most part, these are three separate kinds of books talking about three separate kinds of activities. And if you do all, if you get the whole set, get to do all the different tasks, you will be doing as much as you really can do to keep your Mac running at absolute top performance and keep it healthy for a long time. So the Maintaining and Troubleshooting books are $10 each, and the Speeding Up Your Mac book, because it's very, very long, is $15. But if you buy all three of them, or in fact any three or more Take Control books, we have this build your own bundle deal, so you save 30% off all of them. So if you're considering buying one book, consider buying two or three others or more, and you'll save quite a bit of money.
I don't want to sound like a show for the books, even if I can feel like one at times, but it's interesting how many times we've talked about these subjects, and it's almost difficult not to talk about the other two when you're talking about one. You talk about speeding up your Mac, it's hard not to talk about maintaining. Talk about troubleshooting, it's hard not to talk about maintaining or speeding up. They all really do fit together.
Yeah.
And even with a little overlap, you need all three, because as you said, depending on which topic and what your goal or your objective or your problem is, you need to focus on that aspect of it. So yeah, great books.
Thanks.
Great books. And that's all from takecontrolbooks.com.
Right on. Great.
Joe, what do you think? Maybe by 4 o'clock today you'll have the next book done?
Well, I'm working on the next book, which we'll be talking about real soon. And about 3 hours ago, as of the time we are recording this, Apple announced that the much rumored iCloud will in fact be called iCloud and will exist and will be discussed at WWDC. And although I don't know anything more than anybody else knows about this, it sure sounds like it's going to be something to replace Mobile Me, and since I have a book on that subject, it seems like a fair bet that I now have yet another thing on my to-do list, right? Take control of iCloud.
So we won't take that as an official announcement, but just a likelihood.
That is a likelihood, yes.
All right, that's good. Well, I know I'll be looking forward to not only seeing what Apple gives us, but also what you give us to help us make better use of what Apple gives us.
Absolutely.
Folks, that's Joe Kissell. He is the author of Take Control of Troubleshooting Your Mac, 2nd edition, part of his trilogy of doing a whole lot of cool stuff with your Mac and making sure it's better. And, of course, that doesn't even touch on all his other Take Control books. Joe, it's always fun. Thanks so much. We look forward to seeing you again.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Folks, this is MacVoices TV, the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Please visit our website for links and in our show notes to everything that we just talked about, all the utilities, Joe's books, the whole shooting match. Until the next time, thanks for watching. MacVoices TV is part of the MacVoices group and a member of Mac Level 10.